Hey, y'all. Craig. Well, the president's got the Rona. Hopefully, he'll get through it all right. Great October surprise. So, yeah, news came out this morning early, way before I was awake, that the president and his wife Melania, the first lady, have come down positive after Hope Hicks had tested positive. Evidently, their son Barron negative, the vice president and his wife negative. So that's good, and hope they recover from it quick because it can be nasty. But hey, the good news is, of course, he has a 99% chance of recovery, I believe, and Melania has 99.99 chance. So let's hope. I know he's lost a lot of personal friends, and I'm sure it's heavy on his mind. But of course, the big news other than that was the debate, and of course I watched, and I thought, well, maybe I'd even fall asleep. It'd been a long day, and there was no falling asleep. Wow, yeah, it was nuts. But it's been a few days now, and I guess as I think about it, I don't blame Trump for going kind of ballistic. It was kind of obvious. He and Chris Wallace have a history, and Chris likes to kind of push Trump's buttons, and I think Trump was sort of taking a look at the lay of the land there and seeing what the questioning was like, and obviously checking out Joe Biden and see, well, what kind of Joe do we get today, and Joe seemed to be in pretty good shape, amazingly smooth skin. But he seemed to be ready to do his thing, which was, I think, mostly just a bunch of politic-speak, where they don't really answer the question, but they say the kind of things they wanted to say, and I think that's basically what Trump did, but he did it in the Trump way, which was, the bull in the china shop kind of thing, where he just knocked everything over. But it started off. I kind of wrote out some notes because I went through the transcript, and that's an interesting thing to do sometimes, and put things in kind of perspective again, because in the middle of listening to it, holy smokes. But it started out, with the Supreme Court, and of course our new nominee, and Trump pointed out, hey, elections have consequences. And it's the truth. That's what he ran under. I mean, that was probably a lot of the reason he got elected, was that he had released his list of judges, and this judge was on that list, and she was considered to be one of the top picks, even before all of this. But I had heard that Trump wanted to wait, and if Ginsburg were to pass away, he thought it would be more appropriate to put a lady in her place. Fair enough. I don't know much about Judge Amy, but she seems a really smart lady, and I think she'd probably make a good judge from what I've read and what I've heard. She seems, pretty much hard on the law. The Constitution's the Constitution. She's an originalist, and I think that's what we need. And ultimately, I bet most people would prefer that. If you're going to court, you want an impartial jury, and certainly the judge. And we've seen evidence that that's not always the case anymore. There are a lot of progressive judges, and that's one of the things that Trump brought up is Obama had a lot of positions he didn't fill, and that's really why he was looking for people that really were quite progressive and could go in those positions, and so there was a lot of pushback on that, because that can do a lot of harm, and has done a lot of harm. But anyway, after Trump made his comment, he he had gone into the, well, Joe, you're going to pack the court, and this has been one of those other things that's come up a lot, and why the whole Supreme Court issue is so big, because and I talked about this before, where if it's not impartial, if it's a biased court, you know. It's going to take a while for things to get sorted out. We would not know what to expect. Um, you know, as they say, lawyers don't usually ask you questions unless they already know the answer. And people don't like big surprises and big changes, really. It seems great. This way we'll get our way, but I think a lot of very serious people look at it a little differently. But when asked, of course, Joe kind of bristled up and said, "Well, that might be the position of some in the party, but I am the voice of the Democrat Party. I am the Democrat Party." And good for Joe to say that, but I don't know if anyone believes it at this point, because the Democrats do tend to work as a unit, as a group. They plot and they move forward. And Joe has never been known as a leader. He's been out there for a long time, but he's always been sort of he'll do whatever job they give him to do. I'm pretty sure that's why he was Obama's vice president. It's like, well, Joe knows everybody, and he'll do what needs to be done, and he'll smooth things over with the liberal Democrats, because Obama was obviously not liberal. He was quite progressive, and Joe still believes in that. And he has given his flowery speeches a few times recently, and this is the stuff he knows. He's been saying the same stuff for a long time, but we've kind of moved past that, and his party's moved past it, and so it kind of fell pretty hollow when he said, "I am the Democrat Party." It just, and then of course Roe versus Wade comes up, because that's the left's biggest fear, is that that's going to be overthrown, and Trump pointed out that's not on the ballot. That's not an automatic. I mean, that's a big deal to knock that off, and a lot of people are very invested in it. But that's always what comes up. Anytime there's a conservative judge, that's one of the biggest worries that the left always has. And then Chris comes out with the questioning, and I think this is where Trump started to kind of put this together. It's like, this is not going to be a friendly forum for me. Where they started to talk about, Trump had mentioned how he well, I should reword that. Actually, Biden had said that he wanted to strengthen Obamacare. It was something to do with Obamacare. But anyway, Chris Wallace says, well, the Trump's never shown any plan to replace Obamacare. And Trump said, well, that's ridiculous. I got rid of the individual mandate, and I've been working on this. When Trump right off the bat tried to get rid of it, and that's when McCain gave the famous thumbs down. Trump was still a new thing, and people, especially in his party, did not know what to make of him. And he didn't get any cooperation out of that, really. It did come down right to the edge, but I think everyone knew that it wouldn't happen. But Trump has done a lot of things. When you look at the drug pricing and stuff like that he's trying to force through right now, it's going to be a huge benefit to us. But he's going to get a ton of blowback from the pharmaceutical industry. I mean, and he points that out all the time. But that's a big deal. But then, this is, like I said, that's when I think Trump started to get a sense of, like, this is going to be sort of a showcase of the progressive ideas or the liberal ideas, because Chris Wallace is very liberal. And I think he just decided, Joe's not doing too bad. Chris is trying to push this in his direction. And there's a good audience. I'm just going to push this thing to where I'm going to say what I'm going to say, and that's where Chris spoke up and says, "Well, I'm the moderator," and then after that, Trump said, "Well, I guess I'm debating you," and you knew that Trump at that point had chosen sides. He's like, "Look, I'm going for it. I'm just going to say my piece and hang on, Chris." And he talked about how he brought the drug prices down and was currently working on more of that. And Biden, of course, wanted to disagree with that, and then Trump pointed out, "Well, you agree with Bernie," and then Biden said, "Well, you're a liar. I don't. I've got the Biden plan and all that, and that's that's when Trump said, you just lost the left," and that's kind of true. Without the Bernie backers and the like, I don't think they've got half as many votes. There aren't that many liberals that consider themselves very hardcore for Biden anymore. I really don't think so. I mean, they hate Trump and they'll vote against Trump, but the passion's not there. They're just not. I mean, I don't know a soul who's really, boy, I'm behind Biden with a dynamo. Just doesn't get that response out of people. But the Bernie Bros and all the socialist Marxist side of the Democrats, they're pretty fired up, and they're pushing all these narratives off to the side that are getting all the traction. I mean, they're the ones pushing the whole racism thing. Trump's a racist, and well, I'll get to that later because that came up. So anyway, that early on in the debate, that's where things started to get really heated. And let's see. I think Trump said something about, or maybe it was Biden that about still about the packing the court and Trump accusing him of supporting the ending the filibuster and Trump had pointed out, well, Biden's not going to answer this, and that's when Biden lost it and said, "Would you shut up, man?" They talk about Trump not acting presidential. That wasn't very presidential, and that wasn't a whole lot of heat. That was pretty early on, but Trump was badgering him away, and as Trump does. I mean, Trump was not unlike Trump throughout this whole thing. I mean, it's pretty much what you would expect him to do. But you can imagine these days, dealing with world leaders. A lot of these folks have a huge interest in the way things were going. I go on about the progressives and the New World Order, but I mean, that's a big thing. And there's a lot of power, especially in Europe, that has really invested a lot of their political capital behind these concepts. And Trump's really upset the apple cart. And it's made a lot of people upset who've got decades invested in these progressive policies to sort of get rid of the need for elections and the complexity and just sort of like we just need to install these people as our leaders and make all our decisions kind of thing. And not surprisingly, this stuff when you start to tell them no, I'm not going to do it, they get upset. And you can see how Trump is. I mean, he's tenacious, and I guess it drives people crazy. But at the same time, you can sort of see how he gets his deals done. He just hammers away and hammers, and he doesn't care what the rules are or anything like that. He's going to make you have to deal with things that knock you off your balance. And anyway, that's where Joe blew out. So Chris had already blown out, and then Joe blew out at that point, I think. But certainly Joe kept his composure throughout. But Trump was really getting under his skin at that point. Then let's see. They went in and they talked about COVID, of course, and Biden said, "Well, a lot more people will die unless he gets smarter." And then Trump said that, "Don't ever use the word smart with me," and pointed out, Joe's horrible record as a student and kind of jumbling things up and claiming perhaps better acumen than he has. But um, that was classic Trump. It's obnoxious, but again, he wouldn't have had the opportunity to point these kinds of things out if he just went along with Chris Wallace and his questioning. Because again, you can see, we've already gone from the courts to you get right into the COVID, and then right after that they get into the economy. But the way everything was worded, it was kind of a setup. It was sort of like, well, we know we've got the perspective of time here, and we could ask questions that were more nuanced with like the new information, and it seemed like a lot of the questions were based on the old talking points. That it's like a lot of these things we've already moved past, and it's like the economy. This is like Biden would insist, well, he doesn't have a plan. It's like, well, Trump's had a great economy, and he'll tell you all about the plans and what he's doing and why he's doing it. I mean, he does press conferences all the time and explains this. But, it's kind of one of those things. It's like, no, he doesn't. Yeah, but it was funny after he said, Biden said Trump doesn't have a plan. Trump says, well, tell that to Nancy. And, of course, what he means is for an economic plan, Nancy has been holding the House. She has the majority, and she's a majority leader. And they've been working against Trump, ever since Trump walked through the front door. She just will not, she's stomped out of those meetings more than a few times. She doesn't want to negotiate with him, and I don't think she can, really. And after all, what would she use as the collateral? What great argument would she provide? She hasn't shown it. She just says no, and I want more money. And of course, she's trying to push an additional $3 trillion at this point because, I mean, face it, a lot of that money is really to bail out cities that have done horribly through this, and not just because of the COVID, but because they've kept the extreme lockdowns and they've allowed all this rioting and looting and et cetera. And that's costing them a lot. But that's a shame. But I mean, that shouldn't be up to like us in South Carolina to pay for it. They screwed up, and this has been a problem with a lot of these hardcore leftist-run cities. They're running out of money because they keep promising people stuff they can't deliver, and it's not appealing to businesses to move there. I mean, imagine if I was going to move my business somewhere and I just saw that, wow, they just allowed this whole block to catch on fire and a bunch of looters. I'm not going to move my business there. Wouldn't make any sense. But, that's what we got. And then they got in, let's see, after that, they got back into the mask thing for a little bit. And Trump had mentioned how, Fauci originally said you don't need a mask, and then mask. And they got into the whole mask thing, ironically, of course. Then the rallies. And, Trump, of course, felt like there was no negative effect due to all these rallies. And, I don't know where he caught it. Was it related to that or what? Who knows? But, I mean, it's the same old thing. Do we choose to have a life? Are we going to go out and do things? Or are we going to worry about this and, just exclude? I mean, look, we've lost so much of this year. You think about people's plans, weddings, vacations, stuff like that, sure. But then you look at it's just the loss of life due to drug abuse or just abuse or who knows what. So many different things because of the lockdown. Just deaths not due to COVID, but due to the COVID lockdown. Um, but I've said this a lot and maybe too much, but you know, even here's another illustration with the president getting the COVID. Yeah, we all have to take it seriously, but man, we also have to have a life, and we have to have an economy, and we've got to do stuff. Anyway, then they got into the taxes, right, and Trump's taxes, which, it's illegal to just release somebody's taxes, but of course, why not? And it's funny because Trump made the point. So I'm just following the tax laws, or my accountants are, and if that's how it comes out and you don't like it and you don't think I pay enough, those are your laws. He's changed them to the point where people pay even less, but more people, not just wealthy people. And that's a point that's worth making that Biden was trying to deny. Biden was trying to convince us that Trump's policies just benefited the rich, whereas we know that the median income rose, I think it was $6,000 through Trump's policies. That's for people right in the middle on average. And then, I think throughout all of Obama's presidencies, I think it rose $2,000. So, that's a big difference. But, that's also where he says, well, I've done more in 47 months than you've done in 47 years. But Trump has achieved a great deal. And Biden would have a hard time actually laying claim to much. Because, again, he's been a facilitator and a handshaking guy and all that. But he's never been a big pioneer. That's just not what Joe's known for. And then Chris Wallace started to stick up for the Obama economy. In typical way. And then Biden says, I'm the guy who brought back the automobile industry. And I remember, the whole GM thing. And remember, Biden's summer of jobs and all that, where they just blew a ton of money and there were no jobs. But basically, that money went into unions, and the unions turned around and gave a lot of that money back to the Democrats. And then GM, of course, starts building a plant over in China with after we bail them out. They didn't bail Ford out. Ford did great. GM's got problems, and bailing them out's not the way to solve their problems. It's just like the banking industry. And then, of course, Trump brings up that whole thing. Oh, China ate your lunch, and it's the truth. During the Obama presidency, and certainly during Bush also. China really took advantage of us. That's where all that stuff started. It started almost immediately. But what we had done is we had given them favored nation status, but they were an emerging economy in our nomenclature, and they were given every advantage possible. And so they never really had to disclose trade deals like their public offerings. They don't have to be scrutinized by the same auditors as our companies do. And so it ends up, several of these companies have found that once they've gone public, it's like, wow, actually, they're not only falling short of expectation, but the numbers aren't adding up at all. And then you find out that all the numbers were fraudulent. That's the kind of thing China does. And really under Obama, that was allowed and accepted. And Joe certainly didn't do anything about that. And then, of course, is the whole question about his son Hunter and how, China was allowing Hunter's firm to manage billions of dollars of assets and buy up stuff here in the States. And they're paying him millions to do it. At the same time, he was making a lot of money through the Ukraine, of course, for Burisma, with no energy experience, but he's making a bucket of money. And then, of course, now we know that the First Lady of Moscow is sending him millions. So, what does that indicate? It indicates a lot of corruption, but it also indicates that they were letting other countries get away with a whole lot. And Trump was right to point that out. And then, of course, Biden says, well, none of that is true. And I mean, the proof just came out in the last week or so, but I think other people are working on that. And then Chris Wallace steps in and he says, I hate to raise my voice, but why should I be different than the two of you? Why should voters trust you? This is next. So, like I said, he started off with, I'm going to try to be invisible. And, and then he was interjecting right in the middle of it. And that's a weird question. Why should voters trust you? Because Trump's been there and Biden's been there, it just seems like an odd direction. But speaking of odd directions, so then Joe makes the statement, the reason I got into the race was, of most people, close your eyes, remember what those people looked like coming out of the fields carrying torches, their veins bulging, spewing anti-Semitic bile, and accompanied by the Ku Klux Klan. A young woman got killed, and when they asked the president what he thought, he said there were very fine people on both sides. Now, I've heard Joe say this a few times. He's memorized it well. That whole thing is ridiculous. I mean, well, actually, I've got the quote here. This is the quote that the president actually gave. The whole thing, find people on both sides. Excuse me, they didn't put themselves down as neo-Nazis, and you had some very bad people in that group. But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides. You had people in that group, excuse me, I saw the same pictures you did. You had people in that group that were there to protest the taking down of, to them, a very important statue and the renaming of a park from Robert E. Lee to another name. Well, when you hear it that way, I think you have a better idea of what in the world he was really saying. He wasn't condoning anything about white supremacist groups or anything. And he's on record saying it again in many, many different ways. But that's the quote from, somehow they lifted from right in the middle of that quote that, that somehow he thought there were very fine people on both sides. And that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about the people there to protest, which is very popular now, of course, protesting the taking down of a statue, ironically. And here we are taking down a lot of statues these days. Oh, and then they got into the why don't you say law enforcement thing. And then it got into the racial sensitivity training. And, of course, Trump said because it's racist. And then Biden said that, well, Trump's racist. And that's actually where I want to segue just briefly, because the whole racism thing, it keeps coming up again. And I think it's worth pointing out, after I read you that quote, as a Trump supporter, my feelings on that. Because, in the process of, I guess, running up to the first Trump presidency, you get called all kinds of names by beeping beepers. And that's politics, and that's fine. But as we've gone through the almost 4 years of the Trump presidency, that hasn't really died down, and obviously now it's much louder. And I guess I've come to the realization that there are people out there, a lot of people out there, who just consider Trump supporters to be racist. And that's just insulting and stupid, because what we are patriots. We consider ourselves to be patriots. In that we want this country to go back to what this country was intended to be. And that doesn't mean slaves or any of that kind of nonsense. It means get back to the Constitution, back to the basic laws and the rights that were described in the beginning, not this new radicalized form, not this progressive form, not this socialist form. We have no interest in going that direction. And the left, the radical left, has not come up with a good argument on why we should follow them. And so what they've done is they've decided to just demonize their opponents. And it's been working because people have been getting, I mean, genuinely upset with me and my friends that support Trump. Needlessly. I mean, these are people that have known me my whole life. And, all of a sudden we can't be friends. And that's nuts. Just because the way, hey, I want this politician to keep America the way it is. And you want to change it fundamentally. That is a political aspiration, and I don't share that. But the rest of me is unchanged. I'm the person I've always been. But all of a sudden, you receive all this hatred. And then they turn around and they accuse Trump supporters of, the bulging veins and the hatred and all that. And I got to point this out. Joe Biden had said some flat out racist stuff, and his whole coming up through the Senate, he considered himself a protege of Robert Byrd of West Virginia, who is not only racist, but I mean he was full on KKK, right? The Democrat Party, the KKK was part of that party, the Dixiecrats, all that. I mean, it wasn't the Republicans. The Republicans are the party of Lincoln, and it's the point I'm trying to make isn't so much stop hurting my feelings. It's think, if you're starting to consider that, your friends, because they're voting for Trump, are racist, then maybe you start questioning, why are you coming to that conclusion? Who's helping you along with that kind of conclusion? And, that's something that they got into later on. And that's kind of where we're at in the debate. They got into the racial sensitivity training and why. And, consider where they went to next here. Where they're talking about homicides inside of cities and stuff like that. And Trump's pointing out that, this is predominantly Democrat-run, very leftist-run cities where, crime is so bad and the murders are so high. And Chris Wallace had said, well, is it really a party issue? And Trump will say, yeah, it really is at this point. And then that's where he mentioned or challenged Joe, can you name a law enforcement group that supports you? Because so many have supported Trump. And these are unions, mind you. And of course, Joe couldn't. And this is where there was this exchange. So Chris Wallace says, okay, you've repeatedly criticized the vice president for not specifically calling out Antifa and other left-wing groups. But are you willing tonight to condemn white supremacist and militia groups and to say that they need to stand down and not add to the violence in a number of these cities, as we saw in Kenosha, as we've seen in Portland? Are you prepared to specifically to do that? And Trump says, sure, I'm prepared to do it. I'd say almost anything I see is from the left wing, not the right wing. And Wallace says, so what do you say? And Trump says, I'm willing to do anything I want. I want to see peace. Or I'm willing to do anything. I want to see peace. Wallace says, then do it, sir. And then Biden says, say it, do it, say it. And then Trump says, you want to call, what do you want to call them? Give me a name, give me a, and then Wallace says, white supremacists and right wing, or no, that was Wallace. And then Biden says, the Proud Boys. Trump says, Proud Boys, stand back, stand by. And I'll tell you what, somebody's got to do something about Antifa and the left, because it is not a right-wing problem. This is a left-wing problem. It is. Well, the first thing that was kind of funny is Proud Boys. No one had heard of them, but evidently it's a group that sprung out as a rebuttal to the Antifa groups in Portland. Antifa is sort of based in Portland. It's been there for a while now, and they're kind of regular in their protests and rallies and stuff. And so these guys have got together, and they're a bunch of big dudes. and then they consider themselves like super patriots, and so they go out there and they argue with the Antifa guys, and they're big guys, so no one really wants to mess with them. And so I guess I got to Joe somehow. Well, you got to mention these guys. These guys are real trouble, and it's funny because there's the leader of the group, and he's not white, you know. So it's those kinds of things. It's like, and Joe said, well, Antifa's just an idea, and it's like, my goodness, there they are. They're all labeled. They've been there, for months now. We're dealing with Antifa. That we can see all their posts and everything else. No, it's just an idea. So like I read the quote from Trump about Charlottesville, and I I don't even know what to add to it. It's just the left will just continue to beat on this drum, and I guess it works for them, but it's really annoying. It's a huge turnoff, and I know it's political, but it's the most divisive thing, and I wish they had come up with something that wasn't. But I understand that's also the point. They want everyone to get so upset, so divided. They want to tear away any common ground that we can find, because they want us to get to a point where we're just saying, well, enough. We'll try something else because we can't put up with this anymore. But I don't think you're going to get that here. Americans are stubborn, and a lot of them don't speak up because they don't really care that much. But if you start to take away their stuff, they're going to get really mad. And, really, it's not a whole lot of people that are causing all this trouble. They're making it seem like a lot because they've got the press on their side, and they've got social media on their side, and they've got actors and comedians and all this stuff on their side, and athletes, and all these people are on their side. But none of these people are considered, the great thinkers. These are celebrities. They make their living entertaining people, but I don't know why so many people want to put their faith in larger decisions in life in people who haven't proven to make great decisions. They haven't proven to be successful. They've proven to work their way up into a system and continue to say things that sort of get the right response to that system. But they haven't done anything individually that says, look, I can handle a complicated task and bring it to a success. They can only work in groups supporting that group think. And, it's like after they went through all that, then it gets into that whole thing where they talk about Hunter again. First, Biden was trying to make it about his deceased son Beau, and Trump mentioned, well, I don't know Beau, but I know of Hunter. I know a lot about Hunter, and stuff like that. And that he had thrown out of the military, dishonorable discharge because of cocaine use and all that. Is that fair to bring up? I mean, yeah, only in the context of, look, they'd bring it up with Trump, and if his kids were doing anything bad, and they did actually, that they're making themselves rich, and it's like, no, we've all lost money by doing this, by going into politics, and that's got to be true. I mean, as we've seen, half of his potential audience has decided they hate him now because he is who he is, and he's not a progressive. So, when they're talking about Hunter, they're not only talking about Hunter, but they're talking about Joe and what Joe will allow, what he'll look past. I didn't know he was doing these things. Really, what else do you miss? That's got to be pretty glaring. I mean, that's your kid right there, and you've lost a couple, and so you should really know what's going on over there. Even if you are running for vice president, you would think. So it was one of those where I think that's fair enough to bring up at that point, but you're seeing how what the rules that apply to you don't apply to me, kind of thing. It's like you can't bring up my kid and his troubles and how it might relate to me and my integrity, even though he's broken all these laws and maybe I'm implicated because my position got him to that and all that. Now you can't bring that up, but I can bring up your taxes. I can bring up everything else under the sun, and it's ridiculous. And then of course they went from that to and of course he said all that stuff was untrue and discredited, and that's false. It's actually there's more and more evidence coming out all the time. And then of course the kind of finishing up, they get into the whole. Chris asked, "What do you believe about the science of climate change?" And people know Trump's not big on the whole man-made climate change thing or the Paris Accord or any of that because it's a terrible waste of money and resources. And I've mentioned this before. I mean, there's a lot of failures in the Green New Deal, but the biggest is it's just too expensive. Even if it was the greatest idea, we don't have the money to do it because those guys just spin us into oblivion. $26 trillion, and that's mostly servicing Social Security and a bunch of social projects. That's really what we're paying for, and interest. Nobody seems to be willing to cut back on any of that. So, it's going to compile unless we figure out a way to get the economy really humming. And the only way we can do that is really turn on the machine that we've already paid for. Capitalism will do it. And Trump's doing that. You can see it. I mean, even with the bad news today, I saw the stock market, dump and then come back up. It's, jobs numbers and all that, employment numbers are looking better and better. We're going to work our way out of this successfully. But not if we start chasing the Green New Deal or any of these wacky policies that the progressives have tried out over the last 20, 30 years. It's just been one failure after another, from letting China basically just do whatever they want to do to, well, shoot, our European allies, same thing. We're handing out money to the United Nations and the World Health Organization, yet none of them are doing anything nice for us. Pallet loads of cash to Iran, of all places. We were making some bad decisions. And it's nice to see it's coming back to, doing the things that make business happy, because when business is happy, it grows and it hires people. And we're seeing right now we've got to do a lot. We can't rely on big business. You've got to rely on lots of little businesses too. And that's more than half of our economy. And this whole COVID response has torpedoed a lot of those small businesses. So we've got to do the kinds of things we've got to do to give people confidence to start up a small business again and go for it. And, things like the Green New Deal and forcing people to take more drastic measures, replace their cars with electric cars and, go to the super high efficiency housing and roofing material and change out buildings and get rid of air travel and stop eating meat, and it gets crazier and crazier. And then of course Biden's like, well, that's not my plan. I'm not doing that. I've got the Biden plan. That's what he said, and no one even believes that. So that was the debate, and without all the yelling, and I don't know, is there anything groundbreaking in any of that stuff? Oh yeah, there are election concerns at the end also, which we all know about. Mail-in's fine if the state's been doing it for a long time, but if they're just starting it right now, I mean, look at the mess they got in New Jersey or New York. In New York, I think it's over 100,000 misprinted ballots. So they've already sent them out, and you've seen some of these other elections that they've had for midterms and stuff like that, and the messes they've had. I mean, this is not the time to experiment with new ways of voting. If you don't feel good about going and voting in person, absentee ballots are great because you verify. It's co-verified. That's a safe way to vote if somebody at the post office doesn't dump your votes into the river, because as we know, Postal Union endorsed Joe, and ever since they've been doing wacky stuff. So it's still voting in person. And even if the president has the COVID, I bet a lot of people around you have had it at this point, and probably you've noticed that an awful lot of them are okay now. I mean, obviously, we've lost, at least 100,000 people, if not the 200,000 or whatever. But we've lost a lot of people. But we lose a lot of people on these pandemics. That's just the sad reality. But this one doesn't seem to be that different from the ones in the past, now that we've had a chance to look at it from a distance. And the only thing that was really drastically different about it was the way that we reacted to it. And with the lockdowns and the masks and all this stuff. And what that has truly done has not saved us from being exposed to it, because you're seeing people are getting, infected by it constantly, big numbers. The lockdowns are not a good idea. That's been discussed an awful lot. Masks, if it makes you feel better, wear one. But my point being this: we just need to open things back up. We've got to get on with life, and because there's going to be more stuff coming down the pike, and we've got to be able to vote in person like real people. We've done it as long as we've been around, through world wars and everything else, and worse pandemics than this. We need to grow up here as a nation, and I guess that's the other message about the debate is, if you're so offended by watching two powerful men yell it out, maybe you're missing something. This is a big deal, and they should let two men yell it out, talk over each other. We don't need to know Chris's point of view. We need to see how they work it out and how they negotiate with each other, and see what their true capabilities are. And so I guess we're going to see what Trump's true capabilities are as far as recovering from this COVID. I hope he does well. Yeah, it's nasty. But anyway, I know this is a long one, but it was a lot to go over. Thanks for listening. Hope you have a great day.